Welcome back to another video, and today I'll be doing my half a year eyeshadow palette ranking for 2026. Welcome back, and it's time to do my half yearly palette ranking. So this is something that I have been now doing for some time now on my channel. So as we are now halfway through 2026, I thought that it would be a good time to rank the eyeshadow palettes that I have tried out during this year and sort of see that which are my favorites and which maybe are not so much favorites. About this kind of ranking, how I do it, so by the time this video goes live, you have seen my eyeshadow palette declutter, which I also do half a yearly in order to keep my collection somehow manageable. So every palette that is included here is still a palette that has a place in my collection. There are just preferences that some palettes I like more than others. So none of these palettes are bad to the point that I want to declutter them, because those palettes have already been decluttered on the palette declutter video, and that is why I actually like to do this, in order that I first do the declutter and then I do the ranking, because then it gives I think it gives much more of an even ground to then the palettes that I do want to keep. There are not so many palettes as maybe there have been during maybe last couple of years, but that's been a very conscious decision. I have been very hard trying to buy less makeup this year, based on my makeup budget following that I do throughout the year. It's also visible by the amount of money that I have been spending so far for makeup, and that is actually something that I'm very happy about, that I've been able to maybe manage my buying a bit more and saving money towards other things that I like to put money towards. But that's about the intro. Let's start ranking the palettes, and we have altogether 11 palettes, so this isn't going to be a super long ranking, but I do think the palettes that have been included in this particular ranking, I do think all of them, they definitely have been more or less worth their money. And also, if you see palettes that you thought that, okay, wait, that wasn't released on 2026, that can be true. So these are the palettes that I have tried during this year for the first time. So there can be palettes, for example, from the end of last year that I didn't have time to try out during that year, so that is why they are included in this year's like half a year ranking. Alright then, let's get the show going, and I will try to fit in a swatch image somewhere in the screen, because I do think from most of this, there might be one or two palettes there that I don't have the swatches from, but for majority of these I of course do have the swatches, because I have reviewed most of these already. So I will try to fit in the hand swatch, so you can kind of get an idea of what the palette will look like. So on the last place, and this I don't think is probably that surprising if you saw my review of this one. So this is Starry Skies from Glossgods. This was actually their holiday palette from 2025, but obviously because I got this on their advent calendar, and this was actually the item of the last day of the calendar, so it was nowhere manageable, because Decembers are usually quite hectic on my calendar already, so I didn't get to try this properly until the beginning of this year. So the reason why this is placing on the last place, and again emphasizing that this did survive my eyeshadow palette declutter, in terms of quality there's nothing wrong with this one. I do think in terms of Glossgods' eyeshadow quality, this is very on par with the other palettes, but this is for the color story alone. It's a very grayscale, smoky eye palette, and also what perhaps for me knocks this down is also the fact that there isn't a super lot of variety of this one. A lot of the shimmers and also the mattes did kind of end up looking samey on the eye, so for me this is a palette that could have easily been condensed into a 9-pan palette, and I would still get the same amount of looks as I did when I was working with this sort of like full scale of colors that this has. So purely this was on the last place. It's just the color story that there are like few times here that I gravitate towards this one, and also for the fact that it is quite big compared to the versatility of looks you get with this one. Then on spot number 10, so this is P. Louise's, and this was the hop to the top. Yeah, that's a very that you need to think about that, especially when English is not your first language. So this was one of the smaller palettes that was included in their pink Easter egg, which was their like Easter collection obviously this year. And why this is placing number 10? This is placing above the Glossgods one because it's still like a more cool tone, neutral leaning palette, so I will get more use out of this one. But it is still at the end of the day a very, what I would say, basic color story. And also something that did duck points with this one was that you see the pale sort of pink and purple shades in this one. Unfortunately, those end up looking pretty samey on the eye. They really don't have that much of a punch for being pastel colors, even if you build them. Also the shimmers in this one, aside from the deeper brown shimmer, they look very samey on the eyes. But in terms of quality, this is actually a very nice quality palette, and hopefully Louise will keep doing these smaller palettes because I actually like these are much easier to store than their big clunky ones. Then we are on place number 9. So this is the collection of singles that came out on the Glossgods Advent calendar. This was a bit difficult to like when I thought that how am I gonna like, will I include this in the palette ranking, but these do kind of make up for being a one whole palette, and because these were kind of included in the Advent calendar last year as a bundle, I thought that I'm gonna include these as a one palette. So this, I actually like the color stories of this one much more than the sort of like the pre-made palette that you saw on the last spot of this ranking. But this still, I mean, there are some like quite basic neutral tones that I do kind of have in my collection. The red tone eyeshadows in this one are actually pretty nice, and they are the kind of red tones that I actually enjoy working with because they're not like you're in on the face punchy reds. What still knocks this down is especially the green and blue shades. I was not impressed with the quality of those ones. The shimmers were kind of sheer, you had to build them up compared to the shimmers included in the other color categories in the singles bundle. And then the matte shades, both with the sort of like green and blue, I really had to build them quite a lot, not the best of Glossgods quality. But I do like this as, if I would have to think as a color story, like as a color story, this is much better than, for example, the Starry Skies palette, and even I would say this is a bit more different than the Louise palette that I just showed. Then we are on spot number, are we already on 8? Yeah, I think we are on number 8. So the Dead Roses 2 from bellabeautébar. This was the second bellabeautébar palette that I've tried. I have now said quite many times that I'm a bit unsure. For me personally, is this a brand that I think is worth its quite high price tag? But I do think in terms of color story, this is a bit something unique. This was their Valentine's release during this year, and I think for a Valentine's palette release, I kind of did give this plus points for the fact that it's a bit different kind of Valentine's release. And I do kind of think the inclusion of, for example, the fun yellows in this one, then you get the sort of more grunchier section over here, but then you did end up getting the sort of like more, I would maybe see like muted berry tones, I think would be what I would call the last section of colors over here. This is still not my primary favorite color story. I did discuss in the review that for me this goes kind of a bit too deep. It's kind of maybe a bit too grungy for being in like a everyday favorite. But I do think that if you generally enjoy this kind of color story and you have liked bellabeautébar quality before, then you're probably not disappointed. But for me, compared to some other indie brands that we're gonna soon see more of, especially I think their matte quality is not maybe as good as some other indie brands that I prefer over them, over like bellabeautébar. And also their shimmers. The shimmers are very pretty, and all of these are pretty dimensional, and they are kind of duochrome or multichrome shimmers, but they do crease on me, so that's also another thing that I'm not such a big fan of with this formula. But I would still say that it's like a good quality, and especially if you like this brand and you wanted this palette, maybe see if you can still get it somewhere. Bit unsure because this was a Valentine's edition, that is it still available, but if you can get it and you like this brand, then I don't think you're still gonna be disappointed with this one. Then on spot number 7, so 7 and 6 were like, you haven't actually seen the review of the other palettes because that's still on my review pile. However, I have done the look for it, so that's why I did include it already in the ranking. But these were both palettes that I kind of expected a bit more. Well, actually one of them, which is now on the place number 7, I was thinking it's gonna give me more versatility than it did. But these were kind of palettes that I do like their color stories, and I like this brand generally, but it's just that we kind of fell away with the versatility. So on spot number 7, we are having the Nevermore palette. So this was Ensley Rain's on the second one of their Valentine's palettes. And this I did expect that would have given me much more versatility, but a lot of the shimmers end up looking a bit similar on the eyes. Also with the mattes, they kind of end up looking a bit samey on the eyes. So when I actually started doing looks with this one, I was kind of having the trouble that a lot of the looks came out the same. Even if when you look at this based on face value, you would think you would get a bit more versatility. This does have a good gradient of light to deep shades, and I do generally enjoy this kind of more like Moorish wine red color story that this palette has going for it. But unfortunately, because it didn't have the versatility, I kind of did end up ranking it as the least favorite of these Valentine's duos. Then the one that you haven't seen the review yet, and this is on the 6th spot, but this is now purely placing here because of the color story. But as I said, I have done already like the looks for this one, so I do know what I'm gonna be saying about this one on the review once you see it. So this is the Forevermore, and this was the sort of pink variation of the Ensley range Valentine's Day collection this year, and it's pink, that's why it's ranking above the... I think if the Forevermore would have given me the versatility that I expected from it based on the promos, then we would have switched up these palettes, but because both of them were kind of like, okay, there isn't a ton that you can do with these color stories. With this one, I think you can obviously see it. You are bound to get some kind of pink look out of this one, and a lot of the shimmers, as with the Forevermore, also with this, as with the Nevermore palette, same with this Forevermore palette, a lot of the shimmers are kind of similar once you get them on the eyes, but this I did end up ranking above the Nevermore purely because of the fact that, well, it's pink, and pink is one of my favorite colors. You can kind of see it from my t-shirt today, and that is why I'm ranking the above one. But I would say that the palette duo of these two Valentine's releases, it was really for me like that, okay, like I will have to base the ranking of them somehow, and this is where they kind of did end up in. Then we're getting to the fifth one, and now I think like the last 5 palettes, I think the top 3 was the most difficult one for me to actually organize, but the top 5 with this one, I can already say that these were like palettes that I would say that are genuinely the more like exciting ones I got during this year. So this was the Nomad, and what was this one called? This was the Paris La Bohème, so this was also a Valentine's release. Why did I end up getting... Did I really buy 4 Valentine's releases this year? I think I even said during the beginning of this year that we are trying to not buy so many Valentine's releases, but oh well, that happened. So this again goes to a category of being a grungy Valentine's Day, but unlike for example with the Ensley Rain Nevermore, this one we actually have like genuine versatility. We have this kind of dainty pink side over here, but then we have these more like grungier, maybe a bit more muted colors over here. This isn't still like my ideal color story. Yours later gonna be a Nomad palette that kind of hit all the boxes for me during this half a year period, but with this one it's not the perfect palette, but I do like that we got something different with this one. And I also think, especially with the shimmers in this one, Nomad has been very much killing it with their shimmer formulas, and they continued with their shimmers. They don't do a lot of these super shifty multi-chrome shimmers, but they are still very dimensional shimmers, and these are still very reasonably priced. I'm also liking more and more working with their matte formula. So yeah, on spot number 5, this is still, I think, one of the like more memorable palettes I got during this year, at least so far. And yeah, I think I'm gonna be digging this out at some point. I want to do this second time in my rotation once I do get some more time to have some of my used palettes to my weekly rotation. Then on spot number 4, I think I was kind of maybe expecting that this would rank higher, but considering the review I gave with this one, it wasn't a surprise that this did not make it to the top 3. So this is the Starlight Society palette, and this was Cosmic Brushes, also for Cosmic Beauties, because that's their name these days. So this was Cosmic Beauties, I think like a Black Friday kind of launch during last year, but I ended up waiting for them because they originally launched these on a set, and I thought that I don't want to get the set, I want to get the palette separately, and they had promised that they will launch the palette separately. So once it did launch, I did end up getting it, but of course, because there was the end of the year is usually pretty hectic, I didn't manage to review it until the beginning of this year. In terms of color story, this is one of the more unique color stories I have in my collection, and that is why this is ranking still on the like top 4 of my half a year palette ranking. Unfortunately, what let this down for me was the shimmers. I think I said on my eyeshadow palette declutter that if this would have the shimmer formula that the Lovers palette had, and then the matte formula, which in this case was better on this palette compared to the Lovers palette that I tried during last year, then this would be probably like ranking, I would like even say maybe to number 1 spot, because Cosmic Beauty has been one of like my go-to indie brands for some time now. But unfortunately, because with the shimmer formula, there were some very strange formula things. There were a few shimmers that creased on me, and the shimmers, these didn't just have the sparkle that the Lovers palette shimmers had, or for example the Season palette, which was their holiday palette, I think already like 2 seasons ago. So because they sort of downgraded or did something like different with the shimmer formula compared to some of the previous palettes from this one, that is purely the reason why this is ranking as lowly, like not lowly because it's on top 4, but that's why it didn't make it to a top 3. But I do have to say, as I said, in terms of color story, this is still one of the more unique ones I have in my collection, and I do still like this. And I want to try this again at some point in the future when I again have a bit more space in my sort of makeup rotation. But as compared to the top 3 palettes that you're soon seeing, I just had to take into consideration that this still wasn't the palette that I completely expected to be based on the promo images. And now for the top 3 ones, and yeah, these were difficult. I really had to really had to do thinking with this one. So on spot number 3, this is probably the newest, well, not the newest anymore because I'm currently trying out the Yes Style Haul palettes, but this is like the newest, I think, indie palettes I have in my collection. So this is the Huldra from SiNGE Beauty, and this year was actually the first year that I'm now finally trying SiNGE Beauty, and boy, we have been, I've been just very positively surprised. So this is the kind of color story, and yeah, margins were pretty tight in terms of my top 3. So in the end, I did make the consideration while in terms of like everyday wearability, this is probably the best palette from the top 3 palettes that I had. But I still did have to consider that the top 2 palettes just make me more excited, even if they aren't maybe the most everyday friendly. In terms of formula, also the SiNGE palette that is going to be ranking above this one, I think I did like the matte formula in that one a bit more, but the matte formula and the shimmer formula in this one awesome, and I think that if you have been wanting to try some SiNGE Beauty palettes, I would highly recommend them. I have been very positively surprised by the quality of them and generally, and just I think the color stories that Angie has been able to like create with them. But as I said, the margins were very tight, but I still had to make the consideration that while in terms of everyday wear, this is probably the friendliest of the top 3 palettes, but still the other 2 that ranked above this one, they just make me a bit more excited. And then the number 2 one, so Succulent 2, this was actually the first SiNGE palette I tried during this year, and this is very fun, and surprisingly this is also a bit like blue, green, purple heavy, which is, yeah, that's probably a first in this channel, usually not my favorite color scheme. And why I say blue, green heavy is purely because of the fact that these greens actually on, for example, my eyelids, they kind of end up turning blue once I work with them. So in pan they look kind of green, but they have such a strong like blue, I think, pigment included in the sort of green pigment mix. So that is why, at least on my particular skin tone, this actually ends up looking blue sometimes, even though it technically doesn't have any blue shades. But we do get some berry shades, and what especially impressed me with this one was that how just easy these shades were to work with. The deep shades, the pastel matte shades, those for example, I was thinking, okay, let's see, because pastel mattes are quite hard to formulate. With this one, no issues. The only like shade that was a bit of a dot was this, what was this one? Prenia shade over here. So this peachy matte shade over here didn't require more building, but otherwise this was pretty much of a perfect palette in terms of the fact that how well the shades work, the shimmers were beautiful, and this just, when I look at it, it gets me excited, even if it's in the tones that usually don't necessarily, like usually I can go a little bit like that, oh, it's a bit of like these blue leaning greens and purples, let's see how I like it. But with this one, surprisingly, I did like this one a lot, and a very high recommendation if you've been eyeing this particular palette. And then the palette number 1. So it is probably a good thing I started trying Nomad cosmetics during last year, because on the spot number 1 we have this one. So this is the Fêtes de Provence palette. So this was one of the palettes they brought back for their 10-year anniversary last year, and I did discuss during last year when I saw that they were gonna bring this back. I thought that I'm gonna buy it once I have space in my makeup budget, and that they did come during the spring, and that is why we're having it here. And I did discuss when I reviewed this that there are like few palettes in my collection that when I just look at them, they kind of make me very happy, and this just does it. This has the perfect combination of pinks, there are some bright yellows in this one, and then we kind of get these like blue, like not blue, but these purple and grey tones, but even with those ones, when you combine those, especially with the pink section of this palette, they are still very usable for me, and I think this was one of those palettes that, at least for me, was definitely worth the wait. And also I was very impressed with the formula, the shimmer formula, because when Nomad brought out 3 of these like older palettes, and this is the one that I chose to get from the palettes that they brought back, the original complaint that people had from this palette was that the shimmer formula, it was a very toned down shimmer formula, and I do remember watching reviews, and a lot of people did say already when the original palette was launched that it's a nice palette, but the shimmers could have been sparklier. Well, they fixed that with the upgrade. This now has their new very sparkly shimmer formula, and the shimmers in this one were beautiful, and I could tell already when I swatched this out that okay, unless something very disastrous happens when I try to apply this on my eyes, this is probably gonna be one of my #1 palettes this year, and at least now so far on my half a year ranking, it's a #1 palette for me. And also in terms of the fact that the matte formula, because previously my critique, at least when I tried the Fairy Tale Europe palette, which was the first palette I tried from Nomad during last year, with that one I did say that unfortunately with some of the mattes I had the issue that they almost blended away, so building up the mattes you had to do a bit of finicking with them. But with this one I feel that we didn't have the issue, so even with the deeper mattes they were still very blendable and effortless to work with, but you didn't lose the pigment when you tried to build them, so I do think this was actually improvement to some of the other Nomad palettes that I've tried previously. But yeah, this was a very, at the end of the day, when I sort of like put all the palettes and I started seeing that, okay, but what is the palette that actually made me like very, just by looking at it makes me like that, wow, I really want to work with that one, it's this one. So we shall now see, because this was now the half a year ranking, and we shall see that what the palettes I will still get during the second half of the year, and we shall see that how well each of these palettes will hold their position once I have the whole year's palettes tried out, and then I will be doing my sort of end of the year palette ranking. That was my half a yearly palette ranking, just a friendly reminder. So on the week when this video is going live, which is the Sunday, on the following week there are not going to be any long form YouTube videos, because I'll be traveling with my husband, so we are taking our annual holiday trip. So no, that's the reason there's not gonna be any videos, so there's gonna be a 1 week break. But as I said, during the week that this video has been uploaded, I've also been uploaded my palette declutter, so there is a bit of a more longer video to watch during the week that there is not gonna be any new videos. If you like this video, push the like button, subscribe to the channel, ring the bell button if you want to get notifications from my future content. You can also find me with the same nickname, Makeup Hedgehog, on Instagram. I hope I can see you in another video. Bye bye!